We get to talk about the muscles that you need to know, starting with this section. We have over 600 muscles in the body, and they will be grouped both by function and location. There is a ton of information to know about each muscle, and knowing this information oftentimes helps you remember the name of the muscle. We've already talked about how muscles can be named by shape or for their shape. The location relative to other muscles also comes into play. Knowing the origin and insertion is useful. There is generally a joint between the origin and the insertion, and not always. When you talk about the action of the muscle, you are moving the insertion towards the origin of the muscle. Remember that the origin of a muscle attaches to the immovable bone, and the insertion of a muscle will attach to the movable bone. And then, if you were taking a semester to learn each body area, you would need to know both the innervation and the blood supply for each skeletal muscle. Fortunately, you are not, and you have enough to learn simply by knowing the names of the muscles and their actions. So, how do you remember muscles? Remember to look at the names for important information, such as extensor carpi radialis tells you that you have a muscle that's going to run between the carpals and the radius that will extend the antebrachial area. Make sure you read the description and identify it on a model or a picture, and then relate that location and description to the actual muscle. Try and figure out what the attachments are and translate them into the actions of the muscle. And then literally act out the movements on yourself and say, for example, flexion of the elbow, prime mover, biceps brachii. That helps. Don't get overwhelmed by this diagram and this diagram. We're going to talk about many of these individually. In this section, we're going to talk about muscles of the head. We have two groups within that category, muscles of facial expression, as well as muscles of mastication and tongue movement. Mastication is the big fancy word for, yep, you got it, chewing. The facial expression muscles are going to insert into the skin. They're going to be unbelievably important in nonverbal communication, and that has certainly been driven home when people have been wearing masks because of COVID, because you can only see half their face and you cannot see their mouth unless they have one of those plastic shields. They will all be innervated by cranial nerve 7, which will be the facial nerve. Remember that you have various cranial nerves. You're going to have 12 of them, and there will be pairs. So, sure enough, each side of your face will be innervated by a pair of cranial nerve 7. Epicranius, that tells you exactly what you need to know about this guy. Other fancier term, occipitofrontalis. Epicranius works because it tells you it's around the head. You'll remember that an aponeurosis is a broad, flat tendon. This is one of the aponeuroses that you need to know. So you have a broad, flat tendon that basically sits over your parietal bones and connects the muscle that is known as frontalis, or you can call it the frontal belly of occipitofrontalis, and it will also connect to occipitalis, which is the muscle that sits just superficial to the occipital bone. And there you have it. When you hear epicranius, you are talking about a structure that has 3 components: frontalis, the epicranial aponeurosis, and occipitalis. And let's take a look at some of these. So zygomaticus, that's going to be your smile muscle. Levator labii superioris, yikes. Depressor labii inferioris, yikes. Depressor anguli oris, uh-oh. You don't need to know those, but I have those names in there because I want you to think about what they are telling you. Anytime you see levator, it's going to rise or bring something up. So you're going to have a superior muscle to the mouth. It's going to bring something up. Depressor, labii for lips, inferioris, it's going to be below the lips. That will depress them, maybe make a frown. I think so. And you also have a depressor anguli oris. Oris means mouth. Anguli means at an angle. Depressor means down. So you are bringing your mouth down at an angle. Orbicularis oris is one you need to know. Buccinator and platysma are also need to know muscles. So let's figure out what we have here. So whoops, come back here. I don't know where my cursor is. That's curious. Find frontalis, which is marked as the frontal belly. Find the epicranial aponeurosis, which is marked as the broad flat tendon that sits over your parietal bone, because it is. And find occipitalis, which on this is marked as the occipital belly. You also need to know temporalis, which will conveniently sit just superficial to the temporal bone. That is going to be a major muscle of mastication. You also need to know about masseter, which is going to elevate the mandible, which is also, so masseter will also be another major muscle of mastication. Sternocleidomastoid attaches the sternum and the clavicle, sterno for sternum, cleido for clavicle, to the mastoid process. When you contract that bilaterally, you bring your head into flexion. Let me repeat that. When you contract sternocleidomastoid bilaterally, in other words, you have two of them, one on each side. When you contract that bilaterally, you bring your head into flexion. If you contract that unilaterally, say on the right, you will bring your head into lateral flexion towards the left. So your chin will actually aim towards your left glenohumeral joint. We will talk about trapezius in a later section. You do need to know about orbicularis oculi. I'm on the list on the left now. That's the second name down. That is going to help you wink or blink. Zygomaticus, major and minor, those are going to be the ones that help draw your mouth up into a smile. We'll talk about buccinator, which is deep to some of those muscles. You can just see a sliver of that there. Orbicularis oris is a circular muscle around your mouth. It's going to help you whistle. And you need to know platysma, which is basically two muscles that merge, which are going to attach from the chin down your neck. Muscles of mastication. There are 4 pairs of muscles that are going to be involved in mastication. All of them get their nerve supply from cranial nerve 5. When we're talking about cranial nerves, the convention is that you use Roman numerals. You do not use the Arabic numerals that we're familiar with. So to abbreviate cranial nerve 5, you would write capital C, capital N, Roman numeral 5, and that specifically is the trigeminal nerve. All of the muscles of mastication are innervated by cranial nerve 5. When you talk about mandibular elevation, fancy term for saying jaw closure, you're talking about temporalis and masseter. So temporalis and masseter will elevate the mandible, close the jaw. When you talk about grinding movements, so your ability for your mouth to sort of shift back and forth, right to left, you are talking about what are known as the pterygoid muscles. That P is silent. And they and the masseter are clinically significant. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Buccinator or buccinator is going to have a role in chewing because it helps hold food in between your teeth. This shows you orbicularis oris. Think whistling. So orbicularis oris is the whistling muscle. Temporalis is marked, as is the masseter muscle. Those are going to elevate the mandible and be important for chewing. And buccinator is marked there, and that is going to help hold the food in between your teeth. Now, buccinator is an interesting muscle because it also helps you blow air out of your mouth. So if you're pursing your lips to whistle with orbicularis oris in play, buccinator will actually help you forcefully expel air out of your mouth. And I like to call it the Dizzy Gillespie muscle because if you know anything about jazz, you know about Dizzy Gillespie, who was this fantastic trumpet player. And he had massively developed buccinator muscles. The pterygoids are going to be important because they are often implicated in a condition known as TMJ. TMJ stands for temporomandibular joint. And when you have TMJ, it's actually not functioning correctly. So the two muscles, or two sets of muscles, let me correct myself, that are associated with TMJ are the lateral and medial pterygoids, and you can just call them pterygoids, and masseter. So here's a fun thing to try. Put your fingertips gently where your masseter muscle runs, and you can refer to a diagram to find that out, and gently open and close your mouth, and if you feel clicking and popping, you may have TMJ. If you actually have the masseter muscle massaged out, that can help with TMJ symptomatology. The pterygoids can actually be treated to relax too. However, do not do this at home. Let me repeat that. While the pterygoids can actually be treated, do not try this at home. When you're working on the pterygoids, you need to use gloves. If you're in somebody else's mouth, you better be double gloved. You use the pinky because these muscles are so innervated and are so tender that if you use any other muscle, it's going to be too powerful. So you use your weakest muscle, your weakest digit, your pinky, and you stick your finger in the back of the mouth and you just do the sweep. I've had it done professionally and it made me cry because my pterygoids are so tight, it can be excruciating. So do not do this at home. Muscles of the tongue are listed there: genioglossus, hyoglossus, and styloglossus. Anytime you see glossus, think tongue. These are all going to be innervated by cranial nerve, capital C, capital N, Roman numeral 12, which is known as the hypoglossal nerve. Remember, they are bilateral. And this shows you them, and I have never asked about these guys on an assessment. But there they are, in case you have a crazy desire to know them.